Friends, Spider-Man Brand New Day is finally here, and it's fair to say, with record-breaking pre-sales and billions of views for this trailer. A movie hasn't been this anticipated since the last Spider-Man, No Way Home, 5 years ago. A movie that will do Marvel a world of good after years of disappointing movies and series. A movie that, as its name suggests, will mark a whole new chapter, a fresh start, a brand new day, the real turning point toward the new MCU and toward Avengers Doomsday. And know that if you haven't really been keeping up lately, or if you simply need a refresher on everything that's happened in recent years, you're watching the right video. Together, we're going to analyze the current state of the MCU, everything that's happened in New York and in our Spidey's life. And believe me, there's a lot to talk about. But also, what led the Punisher, Hulk, the Hand, and even a potential mutant to fight alongside Peter. A spoiler-free guide with everything you need to enjoy your viewing and stand out among your friends at the movies. You'll know everything there is to know about the MCU around Spider-Man Brand New Day. So, make yourself comfortable. You're with Kevin Buckott, your favorite Spider-Man's favorite theorist. Opening credits. Where is the MCU at? We are on the brink of the most important event in MCU history. In December, Avengers Doomsday is coming, a movie that will simply destroy the multiverse and everything we know from these 18 years of the MCU in order to rebuild and reboot this universe. And Brand New Day is the very last step to get there. But that doesn't mean it's a movie that will explore the multiverse. No, this Spider-Man is meant to be down-to-earth street level. Well, for most of its story. According to the official synopsis, we find Peter 4 years after the events of No Way Home. That movie took place in 2024, which puts Brand New Day between the fall and winter of 2028. But above all, it's a movie that, like No Way Home, should span across time. At the very beginning, there's a jump-cut montage of all the enemies Peter has faced during those 4 years. A bit like the Fantastic Four, showing us characters like Boomerang, Tarantula, and even Ramrod. Purely aesthetic battles inspired by comic book covers meant to show us Peter's evolution as he loses himself in Spider-Man. Then, like No Way Home, the movie should take place over several weeks, as shown by the different scenes in the TV spots, with, at one point, Spidey and MJ swinging through New York in milder weather and fighting Scorpion in a snowy New York. So, as I was saying, probably over several weeks, between mid-2028 and the end of 2028, this should make this movie the very last one in the timeline. As you know, since the time jump in Avengers Endgame, it's been pretty hard to keep track. While Infinity War took place in 2018, the same year it was released, Endgame, which came out a year later, actually takes place in the MCU in 2023. And since then, well, it's been a mess to keep track of, honestly. Okay, and without getting into all the details for now, let's focus on the timeline of New York. During the snap, Hawkeye, who lost everything, becomes Ronin, a new identity that allows him to hunt down gangsters all over the globe. Those he considers unworthy of having survived the snap, while his own family disappeared. In 2020, he targets New York and decimates the ranks of the New York gangs. A windfall for Wilson Fisk, acquitted in 2021 following the corrupt FBI scandal, who secretly uses Ronin to eliminate his rivals and some of his own overly ambitious associates. That's how he has the father of his protege, Maya Lopez, aka Echo, eliminated. After becoming an orphan, she vows revenge, and Fisk makes her a lieutenant. She even fights Daredevil, who during the snap is fully involved in this underground war. In 2023, the Avengers manage to reverse the snap and bring everyone back. This is where Peter returns and has to cope with Tony's death. But we'll come back to Spider-Man's story in the next chapter, because New York is in turmoil. In 2024 at the Sanctum Sanctorum, it is now Wong who holds the position of Master of the New York Sanctum and also serves as the Sorcerer Supreme. He keeps what's left of the Avengers together, especially with Bruce Banner and Captain Marvel. Sam, for his part, works for the American government and tries to defend Captain's legacy. He confronts the Flag Smashers and decides to take the shield from John Walker, the government-appointed new Captain America, so he can assume the role himself, as Steve would have wanted. It is during this period that we meet Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, the director of the CIA and the OIC, a secret organization that recruits agents for Black Ops missions. She specifically recruits John, who will become US agent and sent Yelena in 2024 to eliminate Clint in New York. It is here that he will train the new Okoye, Kate Bishop, in an adventure against the Tracksuit Mafia. Yelena realizes that she was manipulated by Valentina and by N'Golo Okoye returning to her Black Ops operations. Just like Maya Lopez, who understands that it was Fisk who orchestrated her father's death, which leads her to shoot him in the head, leaving Fisk in a coma. During this entire period, it is his wife, Vanessa, who takes control of all the criminal operations. And it is she who will send Bullseye to kill Foggy Nelson to protect her interests in the Red Hook port. Matt Murdock then decides to hang up the costume and trust in justice. It isn't until 2025 that Fisk wakes up and tries to find Maya. After a traumatic experience facing Echo's new power, he returns to New York with the firm intention of becoming the new mayor and going after the vigilantes. In New Jersey, not far from New York, a young Avengers fan discovers she has powers. However, the D.O.D.C will try to stop her without success. At the end of the series, we learn Kamala is a mutant.
Like a mutation.
The first officially announced as such since the snap. At the very end of 2026, Wilson Fisk wins the New York mayoral election. At the same time, and following the Skrull crisis, which we'll just pretend never happened, Thaddeus Ross is elected the new president of the United States. At the beginning of 2027, Wilson Fisk takes office, with his main goal being the restoration of order in New York and the hunt for vigilantes. In his sights, Daredevil, the Punisher, and Spider-Man. Matt tries to keep his promise to fight crime in the courts. But he sees his efforts destroyed by the creation of a completely corrupt and out-of-control anti-vigilante task force. He then decides to return as Daredevil to fight them and disappears as a fugitive. This is also where the Punisher reappears, since this task force idolizes his methods and sports the vigilante's White Skull emblem, which he doesn't like at all. After saving Matt, he confronts them, is captured, escapes, and goes off the grid. We'll revisit his story soon. At the same time, a global conspiracy breaks out, a conspiracy that threatens to start a third world war. Yes, General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross was actually poisoned with gamma energy by Samuel Stearns, also known as the Leader. Well, that has nothing to do with New York, sure, but basically he turns into Red Hulk, gets beaten by Sam all by himself, and Sam decides to reform the Avengers with his buddy Falcon. Even now, they're just two guys without powers. Here's where things stand. Now, let's get back to our friend Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. Her position as CIA director is threatened by revelations about her company, the OIC. Some congressmen, including the newcomer Bucky Barnes, suspect her of conducting illegal experiments on humans, which is absolutely true. So she tries to eliminate all evidence of her activities by sending her Black Ops agents into a trap. However, Yelena, US agent, and Ghost managed to get out with a surprise guest, Bob. Yes, the Sentry program worked, and Valentina managed to create the ultimate superhero, whom she brings back to New York in her new headquarters. The former Avengers Tower that she bought from Stark Industries. Bucky, Red Guardian, and the former mercenaries come together under the name Thunderbolts and decide to go stop Valentina. However, they find themselves up against a Sentry who is far too strong, but a completely unstable Sentry who develops a much darker second personality, the Void. They then plunge New York into darkness, trapping millions of people in their worst traumas. The Thunderbolts manage to bring him back to his senses and become Valentina's new Avengers. They now occupy the tower. But one question remains. Where was Spider-Man all this time? Probably in the bathroom. Or maybe he also got caught up in Sentry's wave, which is possible. Well, after all, the events with Sentry happen in like 15 minutes, so it's not that surprising either. Anyway, we wrap up our New York story with Season 2 of Daredevil Born Again, which takes place 6 months after the first one, so in the fall of 2027. After the attempted hit on him that Matt foiled, who took Bullseye's bullet, Fisk tightens his grip on the city and makes Daredevil public enemy number 1. At the same time, he uses the Red Hook port to traffic illegal weapons through the CIA and Mr. Charles, an agent of Valentina. Matt, for his part, is living in hiding and starts a rebellion with Karen. Fisk illegally arrests and imprisons everyone who opposes him. So Matt will have to bring him down by revealing that he himself is Daredevil. In an explosive finale, Luke Cage agrees to exile himself from New York, leaving behind his wife, who was murdered by Bullseye, his empire, and City Hall. Now his deputy is the new mayor, and the top spot in New York's underworld is up for grabs. And now it's the enhanced criminals who are going to take it, led by Tombstone. Matt ends up in prison, and Season 3, which will take place in 2028, sees the return of all the Defenders as well as Elektra. And it's here, at the end of 2028, still in the MCU, that Spider-Man Brand New Day takes place in a New York that has seen many twists and turns, which places the movie at about the same time as the post-credits scene of the Thunderbolts, which happens 14 months after their movie, so also at the end of 2028. A scene that takes place during the events of Avengers Doomsday. Like I said, this is the very last step before the end of everything, and it could be that Spider-Man leads us straight to that. Alright, we've covered New York and the MCU, but where exactly is Peter, the Spider-Man of the MCU, at this point? Tom Holland is the very first Spider-Man to have a fourth movie. 4 movies, sure, but Teen Spider-Man has already appeared in 6 films so far. So it's time to review his story in the MCU, where he stands, and how much Brand New Day is going to change everything for him. It all begins in 2016. After the 2 amazing Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield failed, Sony accepted Marvel's offer to bring Spider-Man into the MCU. Tom Holland, a young actor known for his role in The Impossible and the musical Billy Elliot, becomes the new face of a 15-year-old Peter Parker still in high school. He is then recruited by Tony Stark directly at his home. At that time, Peter had only had his powers for 6 months, but he already impressed Tony with his physical abilities and genius. The key difference from previous versions is Uncle Ben isn't present. This Peter isn't responsible for his death, which changes everything. Even though we see that Ben existed through the initials BP on the suitcase in Far From Home, as in Ben Parker. In the same way, we don't know anything about his parents. The only element from his past is that it was made official that the little boy saved at the Stark Expo by Iron Man was actually Peter, which probably explains his fascination. The Russo brothers immediately put him in the middle of an Avengers fight in Germany. And it has to be said, he's far from ridiculous. He stands up to Falcon, Bucky, Ant-Man, and even Captain America. Tony then brings him home, gives him the suit and his AI Karen. But still too young, in Tony and Happy's eyes, he's not allowed on any missions. Peter then goes back to his high school life with his Aunt May and his buddy Ned, hiding his friendly neighborhood Spider-Man activities behind a supposed internship at Stark Industries. And it's while trying to stop a deal selling alien weapons that he runs into the Vulture for the first time. Adrian Toomes, the man behind the mask, is a contractor whose cleanup job in New York in 2012 was taken away by the D.O.D.C, the agency created by Stark Industries to clean up after the Avengers operations. Furious, he steals the alien technology recovered from the sites to make weapons and gadgets, which he sells on the black market. The confrontation is a fiasco for Spidey, and Tony tells him he shouldn't get involved anymore.
Can't you just be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man?
Neighborhood?
But I'm ready for more than that now. No, you're not.
But Peter, who wants to be helpful, doesn't listen to Tony and tracks down a new deal between Mac Gargan, the future Scorpion, and the Vulture. Well, everything goes wrong, and Tony shows up in person to take back the suit from him. Peter then realizes a little too late that the Vulture is actually the father of his date for the prom, and that his plan is to hijack the convoy moving everything out of Stark Tower to the Avengers campus and steal all the technology. He stops him without Stark's suit and is then offered the Iron Spider suit and a place with the Avengers as a reward. But Peter refuses. He prefers to remain the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man for now. The Vulture ends up in prison where he meets McGargan, the criminal arrested on the ferry, to whom he refuses to reveal Spider-Man's identity. McGargan, who apparently manages to escape from prison in Brand New Day to become the Scorpion, which leads us to the Black Order's invasion of Earth. In Infinity War, Peter joins the Manhattan fight alongside Banner, Strange, and Tony, shows his strength, and clings to the ship that leaves the atmosphere after kidnapping Strange. Tony protects him by sending him the famous Iron Spider suit, and the 3 of them end up stuck on a journey to the far reaches of space, heading for Titan. Once Ebony Maw is eliminated thanks to a trick by Peter, Tony officially names him an Avenger. You're an Avenger now. Together with the Guardians of the Galaxy, they set out to face Thanos on his own world. Peter really shows what he's made of there and gives Thanos a hard time, but he doesn't manage to take the gauntlet from him and will end up, like half the galaxy, turning to dust in an absolutely chilling and moving improvised scene. When he returns 5 years later, he reunites with his mentor in a poignant moment and this time uses the Iron Spider to its full potential to fight Thanos' army. And as you know, it's ultimately Tony who sacrifices himself to save everyone, and Peter is there in the final moments of Marvel's greatest hero. He then goes into mourning. Tony was a beacon for him, an example, a mentor. Far From Home takes place weeks after Endgame and shows the world rebuilding for people who were snapped away for 5 years. Peter is now in class with classmates who seem much younger in his memories. Ned and MJ, who were also clearly snapped, are still there, and Peter is starting to develop feelings for her. Now fully Spider-Man, Peter goes on a school trip to Europe with the intention of taking a step back from his role as a hero. But trouble follows him, and a fake Nick Fury, who is actually Talos the Skrull, recruits him to defeat interdimensional elemental monsters. At least in theory, since a new hero appears, Mysterio. And of course, every good Spider-Man fan knows there's something fishy going on. As for Quentin Beck, in the MCU, he's a former engineer of Tony Stark who is seeking revenge. He and his colleagues worked on the hologram technology seen at the beginning of Civil War before they all got fired. That's where the idea came from to get hold of the Stark Industries drones they worked on to orchestrate Mysterio's attacks and make him a new hero. Yeah, the plot is a bit weird. Peter, far from New York, inherits Tony Stark's glasses, which have the Edith AI that gives him control over thousands of drones. He ends up giving them to Quentin Beck, whom he trusted. And it all ends with the showdown in London where Quentin dies. But the King of Illusion doesn't stop there. His team creates a fake video that accuses Peter of being responsible for the European attacks and Quentin's death, and reveals his secret identity to the whole world, the very one he had confessed to MJ in Prague just as the two of them had started their romance. All of this finally leads us to No Way Home. Peter is now known by everyone. Worse, he's accused of murder, a case for damage control here. Yes, the organization founded by Stark has changed a lot. With Tony's death, it became a government agency for managing supers, and it's the one handling the investigation against Peter. Matt Murdock will defend him and he'll be acquitted, but Damage Control uses this chance to seize most of Stark's technology. We'll revisit this in a later chapter. Peter, MJ, and Ned end up blacklisted from all the universities, so Peter goes to Doctor Strange, who offers him a forgetting spell to fully restore his secret identity. Except that's still immature. Peter keeps adding conditions and completely messes up the spell. A rift opens in the multiverse, and he has to team up with two of his variants to send the multiversal villains who come through back to their worlds. But not just any old way. First, they have to be cured of their evil. So we don't yet know the real impact of this choice. Doc Ock might return with Peter at the start of Doomsday. Proof that his timeline has been changed, which normally doesn't really work with the rules of time in the MCU, but well, we'll see. In this fight, Aunt May dies, and her death echoes as the bitterest version of the famous phrase, "With great power comes great responsibility."
And with great power, there must also come great responsibility.
Ultimately, the only solution is for Strange to cast his forgetting spell on a much larger scale. Now it will be Peter Parker himself who will be erased from history as if he never existed. He promises to come back to see Ned and MJ, but he ultimately decides not to do it in order to protect them. The No Way Home post-credits scene sends the SSU's Venom, brought into the MCU by Sony against Kevin Feige's wishes, back to his universe. He leaves behind a Hearthstone, which may become important later on, maybe even by the end of this movie. This is where Brand New Day starts. The movie opens with Ned and MJ getting into MIT, while Peter erases himself so that only Spider-Man remains. And it seems that as Peter fades away, Spider-Man becomes more and more important among New York's vigilantes. But he's not the only one. There's also a street-level Punisher. While every Spider-Man movie so far has shown us Peter surrounded by great MCU mentors, this one focuses on the relationship between two characters who are complete opposites, Spider-Man and the Punisher. And how did he end up here? How can the Punisher, thirsty for vengeance and as bloody as ever, work together with Peter? Well, let me give you a quick overview of his story. Frank Castle is a former Special Forces member until the day he joined a Black Ops unit tasked with carrying out rather dark missions, one of which would completely change his life. While serving in Afghanistan alongside his best friend Billy Russo, under the command of CIA officer William Rowling, he tortured and executed a high-value target. After this dishonorable mission, he decides to leave the squad and return to his family. However, his family gets caught in the middle of a gang feud and is murdered. He then takes on the identity of the Punisher and coldly eliminates all the gangsters involved in this tragedy until he finds himself confronted by Daredevil and his vision of justice. Two characters who are diametrically opposed in their approach to dealing with crime, but Frank eventually listens to him and agrees to surrender and stand trial. Matt agrees to defend him through his law firm Nelson and Murdoch. But Frank is still Frank and completely loses it in the courtroom. That's it.
You want it, I'll give it to you! Anybody who came here today, he won! Hear me beg! He can kiss my ass!
Which leads him to a high-security prison alongside the Kingpin. A Kingpin who will use him to eliminate his enemies in prison before realizing that he can also be useful outside by getting rid of all competition. The Punisher then escapes and helps Matt defeat the Hand. Frank's adventures then continue in his own series. After eliminating most of the gangs involved in his family's murder, he tries to live a normal life before realizing that it was all a plot by his former command. He then goes on a vendetta. First by eliminating that infamous commander, Blacksmith, then by tracking down Rowling from the CIA, and finally the family friend, Billy Russo, the one who carried out the order to kill his family. With rage, he disfigures him and leaves him for dead. Season 2 shows a Frank who tries to find peace, but whose violence keeps following him. He becomes entangled in a new conspiracy and protects a girl who shows him a different path. We also follow Billy Russo's recovery after surviving as he tries to recover his memories. The Punisher eventually foils the plot and finally executes Russo for good, and we won't see him again until Season 1 of Daredevil, Born Again. Well, and it's worth mentioning that the Punisher wasn't planned in the first draft of Born Again, and John Bernthal, the actor who plays him, agreed to return on one condition, that he would have creative control over the character. That's likely how he delivers the best scene in Born Again's first season. In Daredevil's Return, the members of Mayor Fisk's task force all wear the Punisher's logo on their vests, just like I mentioned. And he's going to show them there are consequences. After saving Matt at Karen's request, Frank goes to face the task force alone, which is a pretty stupid decision. As I said, he gets locked up but then escapes. Well, clearly his role was added at the last second just to bring him back, but apart from that confrontation with Matt, it's hard to say he was very memorable. That's why, before coming back in Spider-Man, he had to be given a Punisher special called One Last Kill. In this ultra-violent 45-minute special, we find Frank at the end of his rope. He has got his revenge, killed absolutely everyone involved, and has no reason left to live. He wants to join his family. But Manucci, the boss of a cartel he decimated, doesn't see it that way. She puts a bounty on his head, and he'll have to take out 100 people to make it out alive. Yes, he kills exactly 100 people in just over 15 minutes, and at the very end, he has to choose between saving an innocent family or finishing things with Manucci. And he decides to protect rather than take revenge. A turning point in Frank's life. The little girl from the bakery, who reminds him a lot of his own daughter, will make him realize that he can be more than just his violence, that he can serve the weak, that he can actually become a protector and not just a punisher. And that's how he truly enters the MCU, as the anti-hero who's willing to do what others won't. Frank Castle is in this movie because he's longtime friends with Tom Holland. They supported each other during the Punisher and Spider-Man casting. And now they share this big brother-little brother relationship in a movie that's going to surpass $1 billion. It's a great way to bring Frank Castle into the big leagues. But that's not all. The return of the Punisher isn't an isolated case. It's the sign of a real turning point. The one that first brings the Vigilantes and Spider-Man a little further into the MCU. No more galactic threats. Now Peter is a New Yorker, and the movie is determined to remind him of that, even in the choice of his enemies. His movie has many villains, but most share the same DNA. They're street-level villains: Boomerang, Tarantula, Ramrod, and especially Tombstone and Scorpion, classic enemies of Spider-Man. Enhanced gangsters were introduced to ground the franchise's future in a more realistic style. Let's not forget the return of the Hand, which will have a crucial role in this movie and fits into the same trend. Tom Holland himself says we don't know if the Hand is playing the role of an enemy or an ally, and that says a lot. I think their actions will allow many criminals to escape from prison, but also that they're after the same enemy as Peter. For those who don't know the Hand or don't remember it, a quick refresher is in order. The Hand is an ancient Japanese secret organization. It operates in the shadows and is made up of ninjas who fight for the same cause. In the comics, its members worship a demon called the Beast. The MCU, or at least the Marvel Netflix series, chose a more down-to-earth approach, well, more or less, since the Hand has the power of resurrection. That's how these 5 leaders, the Fingers of the Hand, have run the organization for centuries. Their main enemy is Kunlun, the mystical city where Iron Fist's power originates. In the MCU, the Hand was a main antagonist in Daredevil and the Defenders. They infiltrated New York in the first 2 seasons of Daredevil, resurrected Elektra, and made her their Black Sky, a deadly weapon for the organization. Because the Hand is always searching for its perfect assassin. However, in Defenders, the 5 leaders are eliminated, notably by Elektra, who rebels to take back control of the cult before being buried under the rubble of a building. And since then, no one has heard from her or them. These immortal ninjas, almost zombie-like, return with a mysterious drawing. And I have a feeling they're here to stay, especially since we know that Elektra is definitely back in Season 3 of Daredevil Born Again. In short, street-level heroes have a bright future ahead, especially once again with the Punisher's change in role, since there's a good chance that this Punisher will embrace his new role as a protector in this film. With Spidey at first, even though we can see that they probably never agree, but also most likely with MJ and Sadie Sink's character. First, against the many threats in the film, but also and especially against the D.O.D.C. The D.O.D.C. and the Mutants. Over the years, we have seen many organizations. First of all, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, both dismantled between Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Avengers Age of Ultron. Then we had S.W.O.R.D., an organization founded by Maria Rambeau, which was originally supposed to protect the world from a second invasion, but was strangely diverted in WandaVision and the Marvels. But the organization that has the biggest presence now is the D.O.D.C, Department of Damage Control. As I was saying, it was originally created by Stark Industries to repair the damage caused by the battle between Iron Man and Ironmonger, then during the Chitauri invasion of New York. It was then turned into an executive department of the US government in collaboration with Tony Stark. They're the ones who, in 2014, cleaned up the debris from the helicarrier shot down by Captain Falcon and Natasha, in 2015 damage in Johannesburg, and in 2016 Civil War damage at the airport between the Avengers. It was only during the events of Civil War and the Sokovia Accords that the D.O.D.C changed its role. From then on, it was no longer just responsible for dealing with the damage caused by supers, but also for their supervision and detection. Any vigilante or super who has not signed the Accords is considered an outlaw. And it's in no way home that they reappear after Mysterio's public accusations. Agent Bill Cleary arrests Peter and his loved ones. And it's here that they take control of Stark technology, especially his drones. We see them again in the Miss Marvel series. After reports of superhuman activity in Jersey City, Agent Cleary investigates the Kamala Khan lead, using those same drones before getting ridiculed. Agent Diver, obsessed with this lead, launches an unauthorized raid on Cole's Academic High School and is relieved of duty to avoid a national scandal. We learn in the She-Hulk series that a prison is built in addition to the raft to imprison supers arrested by the D.O.D.C, including Emil Blonsky, known as the Abomination. We also learn in Wonder Man that the D.O.D.C monitors individuals who might be hiding powers, like Simon Williams, who discovered his abilities when he was still a child. Not fully in control of his powers, he caused a fire from which he emerged unharmed without any explanation, which naturally raised suspicions. The D.O.D.C then placed him under constant surveillance in the hope of catching him in the act, because the agency needs to fill its prison to keep receiving its government funding. A prison from which Abomination and Simon's friend, Trevor Slattery, escaped. A disturbing trend that leads us directly to Brand New Day. In their New York office, we will meet William Metzger, played by Tramell Tillman. He seems to be the new director of the D.O.D.C, and this character was not chosen by chance. In the comics, he is a minor character with major implications. He is the leader of an anti-mutant militia. Now, we know that in the MCU so far, there have been few heroes and villains who were born with their abilities. Many of them acquired their abilities through an accident, a spider bite, a scientific experiment, or by mystical means. Only a few are identified as mutants. So having undergone a natural mutation, Namor and Kamala. Of course, there are aliens, gods, magicians, and others who don't fall into this category, but the D.O.D.C hunts humans with dangerous powers that are uncontrolled, untrained, and most importantly, unauthorized. And so, all of this will probably turn into a hunt for mutants. And this is where Sadie Singh's role becomes very interesting. Yes, it's still officially a mystery. Nothing has been confirmed yet. But you know that on this channel, we were among the first to bet on the character of Jean Grey. A version of Jean Grey who hasn't been trained by Charles and doesn't fully control her powers. And I think Damage Control will make her his prisoner zero when it comes to the hunt for future mutants. Anyway, we said no theories, so we'll leave it at that. If you're interested, check out my latest videos. Whatever happens after the Sokovia Accords ended, after the Avengers' actions on Doomsday, and after Fisk's task force was dismantled for questionable practices, now it's Damage Control who's hunting heroes, and one of them, apparently retired, is about to make a spectacular comeback. The return of the real Hulk. We haven't had a Hulk movie since the very beginning of the MCU in 2008, and that's because the distribution rights are still held by Universal. Yet, the character has appeared in many MCU movies, starting with the Avengers. But since Endgame, it's hard to really recognize our Hulk Banner who used to live with his rage. But how did we get here? Bruce Banner spent the first years after his incident in hiding and on the run. At the time, each transformation brought out a monster of power. Back then, he was the most imposing version we've seen in the MCU. Then, Nick Fury decided that this power could be useful. That's why he sends Stark to put pressure on General Ross, who wanted to make Emil Blonsky, as Abomination, a new Avenger. That's how Natasha Romanoff recruits Bruce Banner to join the Avengers. His effectiveness in the Battle of New York is unquestionable. We see Hulk again later in Avengers, Age of Ultron, and it's already in this second film in 2015 that Marvel decides to start his decline. Hulk is too powerful, too dangerous. Even though it's Banner along with Stark who is responsible for creating Ultron, it's Hulk controlled by Wanda who ends up causing the most human casualties in Johannesburg. A duel against Stark that will leave its mark since it's Hulk, not Banner, who decides to go into exile and ends up on Sakaar. There, Hulk never lets Banner take control again. He buried the scientists to make way for the Beast, and he stayed that way for years. He doesn't take part in Earth's conflicts and misses the Avengers breakup. Even back then, the Russo brothers didn't want him. On Sakaar, Hulk becomes a star gladiator. It's the first time he's not just a simple monster who appears and disappears. He has time to live, even without rage. He thinks, speaks, loves. And that lasts until Thor arrives and brings Banner back. But Hulk will still be useful, especially against Fenrir and Surtur in his own way. Finally, the end comes. Thanos, as I was saying, the Russo brothers never wanted to use Hulk. They even say it themselves in interviews. They didn't know what to do with such a powerful monster. So, right from the introduction, they use him as a foil and make him disappear. The monster loses to the Titan and refuses to reappear out of fear. No, not just of the Titan, but even of his Black Order. Honestly, looking back, it's clearly ridiculous. Unlike the misleading trailer, Infinity War sees Banner fighting in the Hulkbuster, providing comic relief. Because apart from warning Strange and Stark, Banner didn't really have any impact. But that was until Endgame. Well, more or less. Because the Russos don't change their approach. They need Hulk for the snap, but without Hulk. So Banner becomes Smart Hulk. Stronger than Banner, but with the Russos, less smart than Banner. Just to remind you, Bruce is one of the smartest scientists in the MCU. Sure, he's specialized in gamma manipulation, but still. Here, he's basically a tinkerer fumbling around with this whole time travel thing, but he's nothing without Stark's genius. In short, once again, Smart Hulk serves as comic relief just like Ant-Man. However, he's the one who does the snap, further reducing his abilities for the future. Because since Endgame, Hulk and Banner have become insignificant. His first reappearance happens in the post-credits scene of Shang-Chi. He seems to be one of the remaining Avengers, and he's summoned by Wong alongside Captain Marvel to analyze the ring's technology. But in the end, he seems to be trying to return to a normal life, far from the superhero circus. And it's especially in She-Hulk that the character evolves the most. He is now able to return to his human form and control his transformation into Smart Hulk at will. He seems to be in complete control. But a car accident mixes his blood with that of his cousin Jennifer Walters, creating She-Hulk. Unlike her cousin, Jennifer is able to control her transformation, but he still trains her on a Mexican island that Tony gave to Banner. We learn that the two scientists worked together during the snap to try to balance Bruce and turn him into Smart Hulk in this dedicated lab. If you don't like Smart Hulk, just wait, because the car accident happened due to a Sakaaran ship. And Banner leaves in the middle of the series for the planet he managed to escape from during Thor Ragnarok, and he doesn't come back empty-handed, but with a son, Scar. So how? Why? The MCU never explained it, but yes, time passes differently on Scar. Apparently, if little Scar managed to become so strong, it's maybe because Hulk actually spent decades as a gladiator, while only a few years passed on Earth. Anyway, Hulk has a son we never heard from again, and is able to control his transformation into Smart Hulk thanks to his wrist device, in Brand New Day, thanks to Stark Industries. But then how will the real Hulk come back in the next Spider-Man? Probably through mind control by a force that no one can see or even fight. Because that's the main threat Spidey will face. Tom Holland explains that the main threat of the movie hasn't been revealed yet. Sure, everything suggests that a Jean Grey would be the perfect culprit. It appears our heroes now face something entirely new. Something that's looking for the perfect host? And who better than an enraged monster for that? Well, I won't say more. Once again, if you're interested, you can find my video on the subject right here. All I can tell you is that the Hulk, who has been repressed since 2023 in the MCU, is going to make his big comeback, but with a little difference. He won't be green, but grey. It's a reference to his origins in the comics. Since Stan Lee first created Hulk as a monster, he wanted to be as neutral as possible. No red so he wouldn't be associated with a demon, and no green to avoid the monster cliché. Hulk was originally intended to be grey. However, the printing at the time didn't handle grey very well, and in the very first issue, it turned green. As a result, fans love it. And from the second issue on, Hulk became the Jade Giant. But the Grey Hulk has made several comebacks. Often shorter than the Green Savage Hulk, he has his own personality and even becomes, in one run, a gangster working for a Las Vegas crime boss. It's a pretty fun run. In short, here he will be grey, at least for part of the movie, probably because he's controlled by an entity. So it won't be the Hulk we know, but rather a different version. Rest assured though, he's more beastly than ever. Alright, we've covered our main characters. It's time to wrap up this guide in style. Spider-Man, the most crucial one. You get it, Brand New Day brings a lot of elements into a single Spider-Man movie. And if your first reaction is to feel a bit hesitant about mixing everything together, you're probably right. This Spider-Man 4 feels almost like an Avengers film in how it addresses key MCU future topics. I mention Avengers because those movies have anchored the entire Infinity Saga. These movies advance the main story and develop the characters most. Avengers and Edge of Tomorrow really allow us to conclude the arcs of the standalone films that came before them and served as a foundation for those that follow. Let's take an example. Obviously, Phase 1 is the introduction phase. We introduce the Avengers, then bring them together, but Phase 2 marks the consequences of that film. Captain questions S.H.I. Ilda. Thor has to face the consequences, and Tony is recovering from his trauma. Same for Edge of Tomorrow, which triggers the Sokovia Accords, Hulk's exile, and the arrival of Black Panther. And when you look closer, Civil War isn't an Avengers movie, but a Captain America movie that played more or less the same role as Brand New Day by bringing a lot of things together. And what about Infinity War and Endgame, which wrapped all that up beautifully? But Marvel seems to have completely forgotten that formula, introducing a ton of new characters in the multiverse saga and never having them cross paths. As a result, we end up with dozens of storylines that lead nowhere and for the most part to dead ends. The audience lost interest, and so did our heroes. Before, things were different, but now Kevin Feige and the Russo brothers are set to restart everything for the saga's conclusion and the MCU's renewal. We've condensed a bit of everything into Phase 6. We need to set up what's next. The Thunderbolts introduce the new Avengers. First step, the Fantastic Four, Marvel's first family. Each movie in this phase lays its own foundation. But Spider-Man Brand New Day carries most of the weight, returning the real Spider-Man to audiences after being somewhat lost recently, while also setting up storylines for Doomsday, Secret Wars, and what follows. A real Spider-Man because Peter's teenage era is finally over. Now Peter is in Manhattan and deals with a kind of crime that has evolved. No more burglars with alien tech robbing ATMs while wearing Avengers masks. No more villains using Stark technology, or even those coming from the multiverse. Now someone is equipping criminals with real suits and powers, turning them into true villains, something that didn't really exist in the MCU before. The threats were certainly aliens, entities, or evil robots, but crime was never this enhanced. For years, the only street-level threat was the Kingpin. Now, the MCU is packed with comic book villains. Brand New Day is set to transform New York's streets. With the Kingpin gone, Tombstone now controls the city's underworld. And we already have concrete proof of this according to a TV spot. A substance called VMAX might be the cause of all this. In any case, possibly the source of Tombstone's powers. In the comics, these villains often come from experiments by Oscorp or Dr. Octopus. Here, we'll see what causes these changes. But as we know, the street-level side is going to evolve, and probably the vigilantes along with it, because clearly up until now, apart from Daredevil and the Punisher, there were few vigilantes patrolling the streets of New York. But the evolution of crime is likely to bring out quite a few new challengers, especially with the return of Moon Knight to the city that never sleeps. To be continued in Daredevil's upcoming adventures and with a new Punisher, plus the Hand's return, which will impact New York's future. But that's not all. The movie clearly marks the return of Hulk, as mentioned earlier, and that's no coincidence. If a Spider-Man movie explains his return, which apparently was originally planned for the Lizard, it's to prepare him for what's next, probably the Secret Wars. And finally, the Mutants. Yes, you probably know that the next saga will be the Mutant Saga. Sure, it won't be a saga 100% focused on the X-Men, but each project will introduce new powerful characters. Starting with Black Panther 3, which, according to Alex Perez, will embrace this theme, with probably the introduction of several mutant characters, including, I hope, the new Storm. But among all these projects, it's actually Brand New Day who will kick things off, the very first film of the New Mutant Saga. And that's exactly what makes Spider-Man Brand New Day special. It's the very last film of the old MCU and the very first of this new era, that of a fully connected universe. So it's the first film of the Mutant Saga, but also of the street-level side of things. In its own way, it serves as a Phase 3 Civil War. Not to mention that I'm more and more convinced that Peter will eventually bond with the symbiotes to get the black suit in Secret Wars. In short, to conclude, if there's only one film to watch from the entire multiverse saga before Doomsday, it's clearly this one. So what are we waiting for? Well guys, I think I've covered everything you need to know to fully dive into this last film before the epic conclusion of the saga. I really tried not to spoil anything for you, not to steer you in any direction, so feel free to let me know in the comments if I forgot anything. As usual, I'll be happy to answer. Meanwhile, if you're curious, my latest theory video about the film is right here. We'll meet again soon on my main channel, secondary channel, and all platforms to talk about the wild Comic-Con adventures. Stay tuned, I'll be there in person and I'll share everything with you.